All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast. Amy and Nick will be looking at Avery Johnson and to see the future of Kansas State football. And we'll also be taking a look at the supporting cast. It's certainly going to help them make another run at the Big 12 crown. Will Howard, he was the starter over the last year and a half, did win them a Big 12 title in Arlington, 2,600 yards, 24 touchdowns, 10 picks in his final season. A player that really struggled with efficiency and turnovers in 20. But he was impressive as a runner for them. And, I said for his size, he had some pretty nice wheels. This is a player that really developed over the past couple of seasons. Chris Kleiman and this offense really took major steps under Will Howard. But most people close to the program, I'm assuming, felt that Avery Johnson was going to be a future of this program. He got the start in the bowl game versus a tough NC State defense. He played over 200 snaps this season, 56% comp rate, just under 500 yards, 5 touchdowns, no picks. Also ran for 7 scores and just shy of 300 yards. Nick, what do you think of them moving on from Will Howard and Avery Johnson? Because we entered the portal, kind of seems like they didn't really try to prevent him by any means. And obviously that's hard to do when you have USC and Ohio State gunning for his services. But I think this is a win-win for all parties. Howard moves on to a better program at Ohio State, can compete for a national championship, and Avery Johnson, he could be the starter for the next 3 years, and they could also have a lot of success.
Will Howard was a phenomenal quarterback for Kansas State. I really think he was a great player who was able to develop and grow as a prospect for this team. And, overall, he had a great tenure, won that Big 12 title in 2022. Like you said, the stats don't lie, right? In 20 games, just about 20 games, 39 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. And now he moves on to, a bigger and better program, like you said, in Ohio State, where he has an opportunity to lead a program that's looking for a national title and fit in that offense. I think this is a natural progression in college football. That's what it kind of seems like these days with the transfer portal, is that the smaller programs in the Power 5 and in the Group of 5 level, Power 4 that is, in the Group of 5 level, they have their players develop and then they kind of just feed them into bigger programs via the transfer portal. And now it's next man up mentality down there in Manhattan, Kansas, and they bring in a great guy in Avery Johnson, who I think can be a star for this team. Johnson was a pretty solid recruit out of high school, a 4-star number 9 quarterback in the class, number one quarterback in the state of Kansas, 85th nationally when he came in out of high school. So obviously he's a solid recruit at that point in time, a guy that they really do like, and now they're going to bring in here and give him the keys to his offense to kind of develop. He played as a true freshman last year, looked pretty good in those limited snaps, and now he's got the keys to the offense. And like you said, it could be a long-term thing. We could play 3 years here potentially and be a leader for this offense.
Now looking at some of the film we saw from Avery Johnson, I really like his pocket awareness, mainly him just being so calm and nimble with his feet. Nice high release. The ball really comes out in a line, real accurate in the intermediate range. Good balance as a runner, really makes some good reads, has above average speed. His initial burst is good, although he's not a burner. I think he's plenty capable of doing a great job when it comes to sidestepping defenders for extra yards. Only completed 45% in the bowl game, but he was a playmaker, especially with his legs, protected the ball on his second touchdown throw. One was a 4th down where they sent a blitz, and the running back was wide open up the seam, didn't panic, hit him in stride, threw a nicely touched back shoulder fade in the end zone later on for another touchdown as well. This is a guy who currently sits at 6'2", 190. Size isn't great. He's to continue to bulk up. Chris Kleiman and Johnson himself, they're quite confident he'll be at the 200-pound mark quite soon. I'm assuming that's probably going to be the target goal for September. I think this is a player, certainly, he's a young guy, like you said, Nick, top 100 recruit. They were able to keep him in-state, outbid the Jayhawks. This is a good player, though. I think a lot of people in the program felt that he's going to be the future, and obviously the completion percentage wasn't good this season. When you're a young guy, though, you're trying to find out what works for you, and I think Johnson's going to get more comfortable in this system as the year goes on. And like they did with Will Howard, he really seemed to develop nicely, and I think as a pocket passer, this is a player who's really going to take a giant uptick this upcoming season. And I think in terms of having that balance as well, because Howard, even though he was like 240 pounds, he was a great runner, Nick. And this guy, he's more nimble, I'm not sure if he has the same speed, because Howard really was that impressive when it comes to running quick time. But I think this is a nice dual threat player, maybe a Colin Kine type player. Do you see that maybe?
I think it's certainly possible at this point in time. He is a dual threat player. Had 7 rushing touchdowns on the ground last season in 8 games for Avery Johnson, 300 yards, just under 300 yards, 5.7 yards per carry. I think, the comp rate obviously is not fantastic, but as you said, young player, a little less accurate, 56% comp rate, but 5 touchdowns, 0 picks, right? No picks in 66 attempts, I think is important to know. So 66 passing attempts without a single interception is a pretty solid start to your career. I'm not as worried with the frame. I think he will get to that 200-pound mark. At 6'2", 200 pounds, I'm not worried about that frame at all. I think that's a good, nimble type body, and he could really work out of the pocket with that size and weight. It's not something that super concerns me at this point in time. Maybe a little undersized, but I like 6'2". I think it's a fine height. Very acclimated coming out of high school, a guy that they have a lot of promise and potential in. He is really solid on the ground. I like the speed. I love the way he's shifty, can kind of make a move, cut, make a guy miss. Will Howard is a very solid quarterback on the ground, so you're kind of plugging in a like for like, in my opinion. Obviously, the size is the big difference between Howard and Johnson at this point in time, but I think Johnson showed in the Pop-Tarts Bowl against NC State that he's a really solid quarterback that can step up and be a good leader. He was a true freshman in that game. Another, has a whole off season of reps and practices to continue to hone his craft. Their schedule, they kind of ease their way into it as well, so that could really help him out early on. I think this is going to work out very well for this offense. I like this quarterback a whole lot.
If Johnson does become a Colin Kine type player, the former quarterback will not be in Manhattan to watch it. He departs for Texas A&M to be the offensive coordinator. Connor Riley, been around a couple of seasons now with Chris Kleiman as the offensive line coach for a long time. He's going to get the nod here. So plenty of familiarity with the offense. Definitely see what kind of pairing they have in store. And now looking at the supporting cast, some of the weapons he will have, DJ Giddens really emerged as one of the nation's better backs, former high school Kansas State Player of the Year. Felt as if Trayshawn Ward would be a better replacement for Deuce Vaughn because they were just so similar in type of speed and stature. Instead, it ended up being the bigger, more powerful Giddens, 1,200 yards, 10 touchdowns. And, just a couple hours ago, Nick, they ended up landing Dylan Edwards, and this is a team that I was going to talk about. Do they have a 1-2 punch? Because Giddens is going to be great, but Trayshawn Ward, he's out of the program. Will they have a guy to spell him? And they didn't before a couple of hours ago, at least one that was proven. Dylan Edwards arrives from Colorado, a former 4-star recruit, was once committed to Notre Dame. So this is a highly sought-after talent. Edwards arrives with plenty of versatility, can catch the ball out of the backfield, seems to be a smaller slashing type runner. This is perfect, Nick, and it's great timing. I'm glad this happened right before we did our episode because we could sit here and talk about how these guys might have the best 1-2 punch in the Big 12 now.
This is a fantastic 1-2 punch. They add Edwards in the portal, a late jump in the portal. He quickly commits to Kansas State, a really solid add. I liked Edwards a lot at Colorado. I think he's a really good back who just didn't have the quite offense around him to work for him. Now he ends up transferring here. Dylan Edwards finds his way out to Kansas State, a guy that grew up in Kansas, so now you bring a guy back to your home turf. I like that a lot. I think it's really solid to get a guy back on your home turf after he went and previously played at Colorado. He scored, touchdowns in multiple games, or multiple touchdowns in a game for Colorado in the past season, was really talented in that early run where Colorado was really going on a dominant run. And then you also have DJ Giddens. Giddens is a fantastic back, really stepped up when Trayshawn Ward did not really step up and be that lead back that we thought he would. Ward just did not have a great season, and instead Giddens takes over the mantle, 1,200 yards rushing, 10 scores on the ground, also 29 grabs out of the backfield for 323 yards and 3 touchdowns. So a dual threat mentality there from Giddens. This is a fantastic 1-2 punch here. I think this really works well in the Big 12. This offense looks pretty solid so far based off these top quarterback and running back duo.
And something he'll have here at Kansas State is a physical offensive line. We average about 4.2 yards per carry at Colorado, and the team that had the worst offensive line in the country. He had 135 yards receiving in that first game of the year against TCU with 3 touchdowns the rest of the year. He was unable to eclipse 25 yards, but they're really force-feeding him the ball, and obviously it's really hard to make breaks because, this is a pretty easy Colorado offense to scout against. They wanted to keep dumping it off to the running backs, try to let them make plays in space. The rest of the year, it just didn't work out. Here at Kansas State, though, Nick, it's going to work out because you're not going to always see it coming. This offense will have some physicality up front. They're not going to be a one-trick pony. They're not going to be desperate either. So I think Dylan Edwards certainly going to bring that versatility to the table. They know how to use their running backs, too. Remember Deuce Vaughn? This guy was incredibly electrifying out of the backfield as a pass catcher. Can really burn you in those areas. So I think this is a great fit for Edwards. Definitely excited to see, 2 in-state natives come back to play for the Wildcats, a team that's, the favorite right now in the conference. This is a run game that has been a big part of this football team. 200-plus yards per contest each of the past 2 seasons. So this run game is going to be a fun one to watch. Look at this pass-catching group. They lose their top 2 receivers, Ben Sinnott and Phillip Brooks. Neither played with Avery Johnson in the bowl game. So not much in terms of, continuity really missing there. J.C. Brown, he was a 3rd leading pass catcher, though. He was another guy who's a rising true sophomore. But the fan base absolutely loves, if I had to guess. This guy had 2 receptions through October 14th. Then he had 5 50-plus yard games over the last 7 contests. That included a big score versus Texas. and 14 receptions over the final 3 games. And he was the one that caught that slot fade in the end zone in the bowl game, Nick, an explosive player that spent most of his time out wide. But he has versatility. I'm very excited for Johnson in this Brown combo, another young player that can really, rise up for this university.
Brown, a true sophomore, got great reps as a true freshman last year. Really talented player, 437 yards receiving, 16.2 yards per grab, and 3 touchdowns. Really came on late in the season. 2 young players producing, 2 true sophomores in Avery Johnson and J.C. Brown that are going to add impacts early on. A very young team, a very talented team in that regard. I think returning him in the slot is fantastic. He has a really nice move in the slot, good off the line, good hands as well. I like his route tree. This is a guy that's going to continue to develop that route tree and form a really solid wide receiving position in the slot. I really like his movement and what he can do. I think this is a really solid wide receiver to have, a guy that's got some looks from other programs in the portal. He's going to continue to ride out Kansas State and be a really talented wide receiver for them.
And picking up Dante Cephas in the portal, things just didn't work out for him at Penn State. Over 2,000 yards of production at Kent State prior to that. A strong possession receiver. He's pretty dangerous in space. I would consider him a good route runner. He's got great stop-start ability. Makes him really tough to defend at the line of scrimmage. Guy in Keegan Johnson, he has great ability to get in and out of his breaks. Pretty good separator. RJ Garcia, 119 yards in the season opener, only about 60 the rest of the year. Maybe the fans can explain that. I don't know if he was disappointing in practice. Maybe if there was injuries, I'm just unaware, Nick. I'll be honest. I'm not sure what happened with RJ Garcia after a big season opener. This was a receiving room we were worried about, talking about how they're undersized. They didn't seem to have much depth. The best receiver is 170 pounds. Ben Sinnott ended up being a phenomenal emergence for them after having a pretty good year in 2022. But in terms of pure wide receivers, they just didn't seem to have it. And I think they got better production than we expected out of this receiving game. But I think right now this might be the best this receiving core has been for a while. They got a nice starting trio here of Brown's emergence. Jaden Jackson, the senior's coming back. I think this is probably the best they've been in a couple of years. I could be wrong. That's certainly up for debate. It just seems with the production incoming of Cephas along with Brown rising up and Keegan Johnson's talent, I think this is a pretty good rotation they have, or at least in terms of starters. I'm a little bit more confident than I was going into last season, at least.
Jaden Jackson, a nice veteran in the locker room, 252 yards receiving, 13.3 yards per grab, and 2 scores last year. A guy not super productive, but a nice veteran in the locker room. I like what you can get out of him. You slot him in at the Z. He'll be competing with Dante Cephas for playing time. Cephas comes over from Penn State. Didn't really work out there, like you said, but really productive at Kent State in his previous stops. I think he's a guy looking for a fresh start here, hoping to be part of this more dynamic offense. Penn State just towards the tail end of the season didn't really throw the ball a whole lot. Didn't really work out for him out there in Happy Valley, but he finds himself to Manhattan, where things could certainly work out better in his favor. I do think this is a pretty solid wide receiving room. I don't think it's one of the best in the nation or anything like that, but I think it's a group in the Big 12 that's pretty solid. Can definitely compete with the rest of the groups in the Big 12 in terms of the better wide receiving rooms. And then you also have a really talented quarterback here starting things off and a great 1-2 punch at running back. I do like what this offense looks like. You're going to get consistent offensive line play as well. This offense is very well rounded and it certainly bodes well for the Wildcats.
The aforementioned RJ Garcia did transfer out. And I do want to kind of clarify, this is an offense they don't exactly need great depth. I mean, it could certainly become an issue at some point, but the style they run, they certainly don't need Ohio State-like receiving room or anything like that. So they can certainly produce only with a couple of guys. Ben Sinnott's loss, so it's going to be enormous. Garrett Oakley, 6'5", 230. He was a freshman last season, 154 yards on 11 grabs. Played sparingly, but he did have 2 grabs for 35 yards in the bowl game. So another one of those young guys, they were able to get on the field, make some connections with Avery Johnson. I think Oakley's going to take some big steps this season, especially if he's continued to bulk up. I think, this is a team that loves physical, disciplined tight ends. Ben Sinnott was arguably, not arguably, I say he is the second best tight end in the NFL draft, just taken by the Commanders early on. So I think this is a nice little opportunity for Oakley here, another young player. I like the supporting cast, Nick. I certainly was already high on it before they landed Dylan Edwards. They just landed him. He's going to be a nice dual threat player for him. And I love the trio of receivers. I think this young quarterback as well, he's certainly going to shore some things up. Might be, some stepping stones to get over. I think early on there could be some issues, especially in some tougher road games. But I think Avery Johnson's going to do great in this system. I think him being the quarterback in his first year, they're certainly a perennial contender for this conference.
Obviously, replacing a talented tight end in Ben Sinnott is obviously going to be tough to do. He's a very physical tight end, was a high draft pick for a reason. But they do have a tight end that in the pipeline. They're going to try to continue to load up on tight ends here. Garrett Oakley. I think he can be potentially a solid tight end for this team. Will Swanson, as well as a guy redshirt senior, has some experience farther down the depth chart, so there is some opportunities for growth there. I think Avery Johnson, he's got the keys to this offense. I'm excited for him. I think he is one of the next big things in college football. He's going to have the entire keys to the offense here. They're going to ease him. They're going to ease him in. You saw that in the bowl game. The schedule opens up with a game against UT Martin and then a trip to Tulane on the road. Plus, they host Arizona after that. So it's going to be some tough teams to face early on, especially Tulane and Arizona. So we're going to learn very quickly if he's the real deal or not. I think the completion percentage is a bit low, but if you can get that a little bit higher, keep the ball on target, avoid interceptions he's done so far, this offense could be in a very good spot, producing very early on.
Now, certainly is a small sample size as well, so the completion percentage, I think, will certainly uptick, but Will Howard's was never all that great. So if you're looking at something around that area, you certainly want to improve on that. They do have 2 straight home games, October 12th and the 19th against Colorado and West Virginia. I think there'll be a great opportunity to see what kind of muscle he's full of. They do play at Tulane and BYU in September. Probably not as worried about that as I am with the Buffaloes and the Mountaineers, Nick. I think I'll certainly test this kid's skin to see how thick it is and see what kind of playmaker he can be for this football team. Again, I think he's going to be great, and I think Kansas State might just be the team I picked to win this conference. I don't think there's going to be any issues here on this side of the ball.
This is going to be a fantastic offense, and this Kansas State team is well-rounded, great coaching. You're going to get out of the coaching down there in Manhattan. They really do have a solid head coach in Chris Kleiman, who's built a solid program. His resume speaks for itself so far. This is a team that I think is a very good position here with Oklahoma and Texas leaving the Big 12. That opens up a door for contenders. I know they picked up some new teams, right? Picked up Colorado, picked up Arizona, but this Kansas State team is in a really good spot. They return some nice talent, and they have a great young quarterback under center here. I like this fortunes for this offense. Look very solid so far.
Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. As always, Nick, appreciate you joining me.
Okay.